We're going to look at one of the most frequent places that a 300D turbo leaks, and that's the drain tube that drains the turbocharger oil into the pan. The turbocharger has to run in a cushion of oil, and it's fed by a pipe that comes over from the oil filter, and it's constantly pumped into the turbo, and then it has to drain out of the turbo bearing back into the pan. And the grommet and O-ring setup that drains into the pan is one of the most frequent places where we find oil leaks after a while in these turbos. We've taken the alternator off of this car, and we've taken off the breather, and this tube that we're talking about is underneath the turbocharger on the passenger side of the engine toward the front. So the orientation is there's the turbocharger. We took off this whole breather assembly. We took off the alternator that was right in this area. And if we look at the tube, it's the tube right there. It's coming up. It bolts onto the bottom of the turbocharger. So you can't see where it bolts unless you actually get underneath the car and look at it. But there are two bolts that bolt this tube to the underside of the turbocharger. So it's fed with oil right here, and right underneath that is where this tube bolts up. So it bolts here and here. You can see the underside of those bolts right up. You're looking at the bolt that comes from the underside, and it comes through the body of the turbocharger right here. And then on the bottom side, I don't know if you can see down in there, right there, the bolt comes in. So underneath there, we're going to take off those two bolts, and then if we get around here and look, where the tube is actually in two sections. This is an air conditioning hose right here, but right underneath the air conditioning hose, and it's kind of hidden right in there, is where it breaks. You can see kind of it bells out right there. It's in a bell shape, and right underneath that bell right there, there's an O-ring. But if we take these top two bolts off, we'll be able to take this apart. We're still not to the piece that leaks. The piece that leaks is way down there where it connects into the pan, and you can see the nasty oil and filth all up around there. It's just where the oil is dripped. Right there, there's a rubber grommet, and that's the culprit. We're going to have to change that rubber grommet. But before we get to changing that grommet, we're going to have to take this tube off. And in order to take the tube off, we're going to have to take the two bolts off. The two bolts are 13 millimeter, and what I'm going to use to break them loose is a 13 millimeter socket on a little short braking bar on a 3/8 drive. Let me look at that and show you that. 13 millimeter socket just on a breaker bar. I'll typically get it. I might need an extension, but I think I can get it with this. Now if I go underneath there, I'm just going to have to do it by feeling those bolts, because I can't see them from up top. But they're right underneath there, and those are the ones I want to break loose. And I think I may have broken that one loose. Let's see about that other one. Okay, now I got that bolt loose. Both the 13 millimeters are out of there. So I'm just going to have to kind of jiggle that thing, and it comes into there. Doesn't take much. It comes into two pieces. You can see that I'm moving it up here on top. And it's got an O-ring, and I'll just have to get it in exactly the right position to get it out of there. And I've forgotten what that was. I just have to play with it. So I finally got it back. I twisted it back and leaned this tube back and jerked it, and it came out from the back side of the turbo. Now you can see that this is an O-ring seal in this bell housing, so there's an O-ring seal that's on that pipe, and this is the piece that bolts to the bottom of the turbo. But the real problem is still down there. It's the grommet that we're after, and that grommet is on this tube right here. So we want to take this tube out. That's what's leaking. One of the problems always with changing the turbo drain seal is getting the bottom piece out of the pan. And the way we've done it, that's a foolproof method. It's a little trouble, but at least it always works, is to drop the sub pan. Once you get the sub pan off, you drive that tube out of there with a jack and a socket. I've just got a 3/8 drive 15mm socket that fits in the hole, and that's where the turbo drain seal tube comes down through there. And it's got an O-ring on there that's really stubborn to get off. Now you can see we've dropped the pan. We've got a jack with about a 12-inch extension, and so now you'll probably be able to see how much torque it takes. When I start jacking that thing up, sometimes the whole engine comes up. I don't know how stubborn this one is going to be. It looks like it's going right up. Well, now it got hard, you see. It got tough. Now you can see the engine starting to move. That's how much torque we're having to put on the thing to drive it out. There, it pops right out, see? So that's the way we get them off. That's about the only way, but that engine started to come up before it ever popped out of there. So that's how much trouble it is. And we'll pull it out of there so you can see what we're dealing with here. Now there's two gaskets, if I get a light on it. There's two gaskets. There's a top one that usually gets real hard, you see, right there. And then there's an O-ring seal under there, and that's what we're going to have to replace. What we like when we change these turbo drain seals is the performance product kit. That way we don't have to buy the pieces separately. So what we have is two different kinds of seals that work together on the bottom. That's what's so hard to get out. And then there's a top O-ring. So there's a bottom O-ring and a seal that goes inside the oil pan there. A top O-ring and then a gasket for this. And we get this kit, these 4 pieces, from Performance Products for $7 or $8 or somewhere in there. It's called number 18-038 in their performance catalog. So once we get that, we want to put this in there in such a way that that's like that, that O-ring's like that. So what I always do is just put a bunch of oil on the thing to start with, so that it slides on there real easy. This is just light motor oil. I just put oil all over it so it'll slip on there. So I got that piece on there. Now I leave that up, actually. It'll slide down in there, but I'm going to put this O-ring on there first, or I mean second. And then I'm going to stick this down in the pan, and then with lots of oil on there, I'm going to push this down over it like that. But I'm not going to push it over it until I get it stuffed inside that pan. Now before we put this new one in, what I always do is clean this opening in the sub pan out real good, because there's always a lot of crusty old pieces. Usually there's a bunch of crusty old pieces of those seals that are hard from the heat, and they got stuck up in there, so I want that to be real clean. That's another reason to take the sub pan off, because that way you know you haven't dropped anything down in your oil pan from, you know, old chunks and so forth. So you see I've got that top seal is slid up on that tube, and I've already pushed the bottom O-ring in there, and it's just kind of moving around. Now what I'm going to do is get this piece started, slide it down the tube, and then just work it around. Now Gordon had to take the camera off of me for a minute for a little swearing break, but what I did was get this screwdriver on top of it, on top of that gasket, and I get a little leverage against that bolt right there that holds the front end together, where that caster bolt is, and I just push down on it like that, and then on this side push down on it with a big screwdriver like that on the top of the lip. Of course I had lots of oil on it, but it went right in that way. So I didn't have enough strength with my fingers, but when I got the leverage of the screwdriver, and you can see now that it's in there real nice and tight. Okay, so we need to put it, I believe it came in from this side of the turbo, and we're going to have to get it in the right position. But first, we're going to slide it over that O-ring down there. So I got it slid over the hole, and now I'm just going to put the Permatex gasket and be very careful to get that on there and get those bolts up through that hole. Here you can see that.
Okay.
And now, as you recall, I've got to put 2 bolts from the underside through there. Okay, so I got those bolts started, and now it's just a matter of being real patient, because you can see that the gasket is in the right spot and I've got the bolts started. Now I'm just going to have to be real patient to turn those bolts back to where they were. Now the very final step after we've got that top piece, that top tube Permatex to the bottom of the turbocharger, is we need to pop the O-ring back into that grommet. And so what we've done already, and I'll just show you what we did, is we took that same 15mm socket and put it up in there and just tapped that like that. And that O-ring that's inside this tube on the bottom pops into that grommet, in the groove in the grommet, and it seats, and it really, you can't really push it too far. I mean, it just takes a little tap and you'll see it move. And you see that the tube is about, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch up inside the hole referenced from the bottom of the subpan there.